Hello, everyone. It's Carolyn Baker here with my dear friend, Andrew Harvey. And this morning, as elders in Elderspeak, we want to come to you once again and talk about what is going on in this time of potential extinction and also potential birth of a new human species. So Andrew, I'm going to throw it to you first, and then I would like to make some comments as well. You're pretty excited about something you have to talk about this morning, so please begin.
Look, it's obvious now that immense and terrible forces are ranged against the potential birth of a new humanity. It's obvious that we have in place on every level of our society forces that are supported by very rich, very powerful people that are dedicated to the destruction of our democracy. We're telling you this on the day that the impeachment trial begins, the impeachment of a president that incited insurrection. And what is devastating about today is the knowledge that we all have that the chances of him being impeached for what he obviously, nakedly, visibly, and irrefutably did are extraordinarily slim. That should wake us all up. And what it should wake us all up to is the triumph of lies in our culture. I'm going to say something about lies. If you look, as I have looked for many years, into the deep, strange texts about Kali Yuga in the Hindu tradition, and into the other great prophecies from the various traditions about our time, you will see one theme repeated again and again and again and again. And that is that this time will be a time of lies. And in all of the traditions, lying is associated with the demonic. The demonic loves nothing better than to lie and to sow total confusion about the truth, because it knows that if the truth of our divine nature and if the truth of the extent of the dark forces now evidently ranged against that divine nature gets out, then a tremendous transfiguration, a tremendous birth is possible. So at the very moment when all of the possibilities of a birth of a new divine humanity are there, so ranged against them are the full force of the lie. And so let's start there.
Yes, let's do. And I would also like to go back for just a moment to our book in 2017, Savage Grace. And when we wrote that book, we talked about, and this is from the Hindu tradition that you were just mentioning, we talked about the stages of Kali's dance. Mm-hmm. And the first one is the ominous stage, which began with the creation of a technological civilization rooted in a denial of the sacred feminine and in the belief that nature existed only to be exploited. And each one of these stages of her dance becomes more severe. In the second stage, or the dangerous stage, this is fueled by an endless energy, and it was a time of just rape of the earth and the growth of the military industrial complex, and realizing that wars were one of the most profitable industries on the planet. And then that dance moves to the severe stage, which has now obviously begun to unfold with very little significant environmental mitigation of the damage that's been done to our ecosystem. And it's just a matter of decades before the planet may be uninhabitable. And then there's the lethal stage, which was a whole bunch of appalling facts that are making clear that Kali's dance would ultimately destroy human and animal life and vast portions of the planet. And as you say, this is all embedded with lies. And I am really,
every stage is another lie.
yeah,
Every stage, the lie expands.
absolutely.
The lie of a technological civilization is that we have infinite control over nature and
Right.
capacity for infinite growth. That is the drug of choice of the lie.
Yeah,
And we expanded and took that lie and became addicted to it. And now we are on the cusp or in the lethal stage.
and in terms of the lies and what we're seeing right now, today, yesterday, all around us, is that lies are becoming another drug of choice within themselves. Because yesterday in Arizona, something incredibly appalling happened where there was a decision made to recount the votes of the election and throw out the ones against Trump. This is like, how many months are we from that election? And even we are pretty certain as we look at this, impeachment trial, we are it's very obvious that the Democrats are going to present the evidence and video footage of what actually happened on January 6th, which Republicans will not convict. And if that isn't lies on steroids and complete fascistic madness, I don't know what is.
I think the other connection that we make, both in Savage Grace and in Radical Regeneration, is between this triumph of lies and fascism. Fascism is not an ideology. It doesn't have a vision. What it has is an addiction to power at all costs. And one of the most terrifying aspects of our disaster is that we now have in place what Shoshana Zuboff calls surveillance capitalism. What that means is that in the social media that we're all condemned to employ, we're employing it right now, we have a vast behemoth which uses our personal data in ways that makes it fabulously powerful and fabulously rich, but uses them without any conscience, without any commitment to actually judging the truth of what's spread on social media. And what Shoshana Zuboff made absolutely clear in her stunning and terrifying and amazing article 10 days ago in the Sunday Times, which I beg everyone to read, is that the power that social media now has to spread lies, to spread conspiracy theories, 70,000 different websites, for example, on QAnon were taken down, but only just recently, not before they had done their polluting work. The power that social media now has, not only to spread lies, but to give them a solid, interconnected power of fake truth, is truly devastating and potentially the seedbed of a fascism that will be more monstrous than the fascism of Hitler, because it will have not only the full power of the military-industrial complex, it will have the full power of an amoral and conscienceless social media behind it, which is potentially total domination of the mind and psyche and spirit of humanity at the very moment when humanity could, if it aligned itself with Kali's dance and with the laws of the Dark Night and went through a great grueling transformation, birth a radical and empowered and gloriously rich and powerful divine humanity. This is what we're facing. This is the great battle for the soul of humanity that is going on right now. And while these lies are tremendously dangerous, you and I are not talking like this just to shake and frighten people.
Oh, no.
We're talking like this to alert people to the need to plunge deeper into spiritual practice, into the truth of sacred reality, and go out further in brave acts of compassion and justice and sacred activism, so as to align with one of the secret themes of the Kali tradition, which is that, terrifying though this dance is, if we can see clearly what it's revealing about us and change that, then amazing, miraculous births of multiple kinds are possible. So don't see us as doom and gloom prophets. We're not. We are people who are aware of what's possible, but also aware of what's ranged against what's possible, and deeply, deeply committed to giving you the exact information to galvanize you into claiming the real truth of what's going on, spreading it, and in your own lives, making yourselves true sacred activists aligned with the great project of the birth. That's the whole theme of radical regeneration.
And in order to be a sacred activist, you have now talked about the sacred practices. I'd like to talk a little bit about the activism and information, and then raise a question for us both to discuss. I believe it's very important that people understand fascism and what it really is, rather than just throwing the term around. Sometimes we throw that term around and, I'm not sure everybody understands what we're talking about. There are two names that I would like everyone to become familiar with, and that is Timothy Snyder, who is a history professor at Yale, and another history professor at Yale, Jason Stanley. Both are scholars of fascism. You can read all about Timothy Snyder's work at timothysnyder.org and Jason Stanley at jasonstanley.com. I think it's very important that sacred activists be very familiar with what fascism is and what it isn't. And the question I'd like to throw out for us to look at, Andrew, is there is such confusion now about these political terms. And people are calling fascism socialism when it isn't. That's, there's such a distortion of the terms. Socialism and fascism are very different. Why don't you take off on that?
Well, socialism is a vision that is born from a sacred understanding of the equality of all life and the rights of all beings to dignity. Right. You may agree with it or disagree with it, but that is its fundamental ideology. And the kind of socialism that I think could help us very deeply is what I call democratic socialism, that is a very canny marriage between the very best of capitalism and the very best of socialism, in that it allows for free enterprise, it allows for people being rewarded for their gifts, but has certain very important safety nets like universal healthcare, universal free education, environmental rights, etc., very firmly in place, and honors the necessary place of big government in a complex world. And that kind of democratic socialism could offer us a very potent and dignified way forward, which is why, for example, Bernie Sanders, the wild Bernie Sanders with his mittens, has had such an impact on the young, because they know that the capitalism that we're living through is an absolute naked disaster, and they have no desire whatever for communism. What they want is a just, harmonious, compassionate, balanced society, which gives them a chance to excel, but also looks after the more damaged and destitute and broken amongst us. So let's get clear about socialism. And one of the most terrible things that has happened in the last bit has been the systematic and very carefully thought out plot by the far right since the 1980s to scare the bejesus out of people with the word socialism, confusing it with communism. And this has worked horribly, partly through the explosion of the social media, and led to all kinds of conspiracy theories about the elites who want to bring in this to increase their power and make it easier for them to find babies to eat and drink their blood. This madness has come from that. Fascism has no ideology and is a very bizarre but very dangerous gallimaufry, bouillabaisse, if you like, of conspiracy theories, such as the conspiracy theories against the Jews that Hitler promulgated, which have been taken up by QAnon in different kinds of crazy, chaotic ways. Deep acting on resentment of a class that feels disinherited or disabused. In our case, it's the working poor, it's the white working poor that feel their identity threatened. In Hitler's case, he was working with the resentment caused by the First World War and the agreements and treaties after the First World War that left the Germans feeling totally humiliated. So fascism is all about domination, power, pageantry, pseudo-patriotism, and the firm control over the organs of truthful discourse.
Well, it's very much about corporatocracy.
Yes.
And dark money.
Yes.
And, you know, it's like Marjorie Taylor Greene now has been removed from committees, but what is she doing? She's not sitting at home doing her nails. She's coming to work and on her computer raising thousands and thousands of dollars for the Republicans. It's all about grift. It's all about how much money you can make out of so-called democracy. Yeah, out of our system. How can I make money? Not how can I protect it? Not how can I nurture democracy, but how can I destroy it so that I get rich?
I think that's true, but I think we have to be brave enough to say what's really going on. And I think that Shoshana Zuboff's work and Jane Mayer's work and the new book by Kurt Applebaum, Evil Geniuses, which is another book that everyone should read.
I have to correct you, it's Anderson.
Anderson, sorry, yes, I'm always saying Applebaum. I don't know why, it's just Kurt Anderson, right. But what these books make clear is something that should make all of our heads rotate like Sybil in The Exorcist. What it makes clear is that there is a concerted plan of very rich, very powerful, far-right people who are envisaging a world which will be dominated by the fabulously rich elite, who will have in their control the greatest resources of artificial intelligence, and therefore not need a middle class, will only need a slave class that is entirely stripped of its rights and made totally vulnerable to whatever the elite promulgates through their infinite power. That's what's being planned. We see that in Shoshana Zuboff's brilliant article. She quotes from officers of Facebook who say quite blatantly that they don't care about the truth of what's being said. All they care about is the money that's coming to it. Fundamentalist bottom line capitalism is the ideal co-agent of fascism. So when you really take that in, from a mystical point of view, what you are taking in is this. What you're taking in is that there are on the earth what Charles Upton has brilliantly called Antichrist energies. The Antichrist that was always known to appear at this moment of potential total birth of a new humanity is not a person. The Antichrist is a coagulation of very carefully organized dark energies. And we can see these dark energies on every level of our culture, in the appalling Republican abetting of Trump's lies and scandalous desecration of the Constitution, in the addiction to artificial intelligence, which mimics the real birth by visions of singularity and the transhuman, constructed humans instead of divinized humans. We can see it very clearly in the promulgation of lies and conspiracy theories that have taken over the lives of millions and millions and millions of Americans. And we can see it in the despair and the paralysis that all of these very studiously focused endeavors are creating amongst a great swath of the population. And the reason why you and I concentrate so much on the US and constantly beg people to see these energies for what they are, part of that lethal dance of Kali that could destroy our earth. Why we concentrate on the US is this: if fascism is born here, then there is absolutely no hope of the great regeneration taking place, because the timeline for us redoing the structures of economics and politics is very slim. We've been given 10 years at most to change our relationship with nature on every level so as to give the human race a chance of survival. And if fascism is born in the US, the already growing trend to authoritarianism that we see in the Philippines, that we see in Hungary, that we see in Myanmar, and the latest coup that we know dominates Russia, that we know dominates China, will become universal. And any chance of the sacred birth of a new humanity, any chance of dealing with the erupting global crises that are now constituting our dark night will be lost, which is why we're so emphatic about getting the clearest possible diagram of these Antichrist energies out, while saying that terrible though they are, they're also a sign that a potential birth is coming, because why would they be so agonizedly angry and calculating if they didn't know somewhere that a wholly new potential was also potentially being born? So this is the battle, as we say, for the soul of the world.
It is. And, you know, I think we're perilously close to losing it politically here in the United States.
Yes.
You know, this may be our last election, the one that we had in November. It could be our last election. This could be our last impeachment trial, you know, and we're going to have to work very hard to stem the tide of fascism politically, because there are only two parties now, the Democratic Party and the Fascist Party. That's all there is.
What are the signs of hope? Because I don't think we can leave people just with despair. The signs of hope for me are in Biden's calm majesty and dignity that he's bringing to everything that he does. The signs of hope are that the Democrats do have some very concrete, very intelligent plans, which they are, it seems, prepared to play hardball to get out. The signs of hope are that even if the impeachment trial fails, there could be civil criminal cases that could get the main instigators of this.
Yes.
The signs of hope are in the gradual awakening of certain people who have been enslaved by conspiracy theories. I was watching last night on TV the lawyer of the QAnon shaman talking and saying that this man is a fundamentally intelligent man, and in prison alone, he's come to understand that he's been lied to, his mind has been taken over, and he's going through the grueling and painful process of waking up from a nightmare into the daylight of very difficult truth. He's going through it. So we can assume that as the court cases come against Trump, which they will, as the devastating information continues to come out about how this conspiracy against democracy was organized, many people could wake up. But the truth remains, everybody, this, it remains this, because what this is saying to all of us is that if we want a different end to this story than the birth of a monstrous and all-powerful fascism organized by a billionaire elite, if we want an end to the story that doesn't include that and doesn't include the kind of terrifying scenario that we know is now possible, then everybody has to become very much more canny and savvy about what's really going on,
Yes.
very much more serious about intense inner practice, and very much more committed to gathering together as sacred activists to put through a peaceful, non-violent revolution of the structures of cold evil that now almost certainly ensure our extinction. And it may be, and this is the deepest source of hope that I have, it may be that just as species in the natural world have to come to a moment when they are comprehensively threatened and menaced from every single side, to force them into a quantum leap into the next level of adaptation. That's how evolution works. It may be that this crisis is being allowed by the divine to get so frightening, so terrible, precisely because it has to destroy the kind of complacency, the kind of apathy, the kind of paralysis, the kind of deliberate dissociation from the real facts of real injustice and chaos, so as to galvanize the human race finally into leaping into the arms of its next stage. That is the greatest source of hope that I have.
So I don't use the word hope much, and you know why, because most of the time hope is hopium.
Right, but that isn't hopium, because that comes from the deepest experience of the dark night that I've lived, and the deepest experience of the dark night in the mystical traditions and actual natural science. It's how things work. Yeah.
So, but I personally avoid it as much as possible.
Yes.
It's time to go deeper than hope.
Yes,
and there is a place between denial and despair, and that's what our work is all about. One ray of...
And what is that place? How would you define that place? Because I agree with you. I'm not selling hopium. I'm looking at the situation in its direty about trying to find and note and celebrate the rays of light, the rays of the birth, which is very important. But what is the place between denial and despair?
The place between denial and despair, and I'm borrowing a term here from Jem Bendel, is something called deep adaptation. Right. And deep adaptation, in 2 words, describes our work. It's looking squarely at what our predicament is, finding ways to mitigate that as much as possible in the real world, and then coming to that place of surrender of, what can I not control? What is bigger than I am, or even my community? And what is mine to do? And where can I spread as much compassion and love as possible? And where
whatever happens,
it's not focused on the outcome.
Right.
And that's why I don't use hope, because hope is generally associated with outcome. Well, if I have hope, it'll get better. And so, the deep adaptation perspective I really love, because it is that place of what is mine to do? Well, get out there and do it. What can I not do? What is beyond me? And then how can I do what is right because it is right?
Because it is beautiful and holy and right.
Exactly. We talk about in that section in Radical Regeneration, nobility of soul. How do I tap into nobility of soul in this crisis and become the person that the world needs me to be, that I want to be? You asked me a while ago some sources of inspiration. One source of inspiration I have is Georgia. Look at what happened in Georgia as grassroots people got in there and got out the vote. And that same kind of thing is happening in other red states. And so I think that, you know, the people pulling together, and of course it was mostly African Americans, the people pulling together and making this happen is a wonderful source of inspiration. And as we, as European Americans, continue to work on and heal our racism, I see tremendous possibilities for us to possibly turn things around politically. As far as the environment, that's something that right now is not getting any attention at all.
That's the tragedy of our time, isn't it?
Tragedy of our time is
that's what Trump has done. This whole crisis has
absolutely
completely diverted people
absolutely
in terrible ways from the appalling problems that we need to address yesterday.
And our huge crisis of the pandemic is inextricably connected with climate chaos.
Right.
And, you know, it looks like there may be, we have all these variants, and it looks like there may be more pandemics on the way, which continues to take our attention away from the horror of environmental catastrophe.
If the worst scenario happens, if we do have a US fractured and dominated by this kind of fascism that we're describing, that we described in Savage Grace and that we laid out in great detail in Radical Regeneration. And I have to say that the vision that we're offering is not ours alone. Timothy Snyder, all of the major players in the historical world, in the environmental world, in like Shoshana Zuboff, etc., they all are saying the same thing. And this is something that people really have to pay attention to. But if this worst scenario does materialize, what then does deep adaptation have to say to us? What then who do we become, and what do we do?
Well, I would say it's, you know, it's exactly what we've been writing about in our books. We wrote about it in Savage Grace. It is doing what we can do to resist. And of course, sometimes for some people that means giving their lives. And if it doesn't mean giving your life, if it means, you know, that you survive because you're taking care of yourself and protecting others, that's your work as a sacred activist. But the spiritual, that is where the spiritual practices really become absolutely necessary. Because
they become the fountain of strength.
They become your fountain of strength. You know, I go back to Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning and what he went through in the death camp. And, you know, it's that kind of milieu that and energy that forces a person to go deeply in the deepest places of their own soul, to find that well of joy that we wrote about in Return to Joy, to find that place of incredible strength and courage that can only come from a deep descent into the soul.
And that might be the last gift to humanity. Maybe. Of the divine, not to be saved from our hubris and craziness, but for those of us who dare to wake up to the situation, to be given this extreme impetus to go as deep as possible into ourselves, where we discover that we are divine and can continue to create love and compassion and harmony and justice, even when they are being destroyed. So our ultimate enterprise on the earth could be the enterprise of preserving the sacred image of our divinity and our essential naked human dignity through everything.
Well, Andrew, I think that's a good place for us to stop on that beautiful note. And I'll be thinking of you this week as we both watch the impeachment trial. And I bless you and pray that you have a really joyous week as we celebrate as well as pray.